Welcome to Afterlives with Kara Cooney, in which we discuss ancient Egyptian history and relevant current events that we think will be of interest to our audience. I am Kara Cooney, and I'm a professor of Egyptology at UCLA. This podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at UCLA. In recent years, I've become active in communicating with the general public about the history of ancient Egypt through lectures, interviews, social media, books, and guest appearances. This podcast is my opportunity to take the kinds of deep dives into history that are not always possible in academic formats.
Hello, Kara.
Hi, Jordan.
Welcome to Afterlives with Kara Cooney. Today we're going to be talking about your new publication with Nat Geo called Good Kings. I have the summary here to let me know what you think. I'm sure you've already heard it. But in a new era where democracies around the world are threatened or crumbling, best-selling author Kara Cooney turns to 5 ancient Egyptian pharaohs, Khufu, Senwosret III, Akhenaten, Ramses II, and Taharqa, to understand why so often give up power to the few and what it can mean for our future.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
Big topic.
I bit off a lot. And yeah, so what was the question?
What do you do? Well, we're going to talk about your writing process, then we'll get into the intro.
Okay.
But so I guess we can start with, how did you choose the topic for the new book?
Okay.
What inspired it?
Yeah. So,
you were writing about women a lot. So,
yeah.
What are we switching to now? We're still focusing on the patriarchy, but in a different kind of lens.
Yeah, it's very similar to the last book, When Women Ruled the World, but it's just coming at it from the other angle. So if When Women Ruled the World is a way of talking about the patriarchy by looking at female rulers, this is a way of talking about the patriarchy by talking about the patriarchy and looking at the male rulers. Yeah. And as for the topic and how it came about, I have a really good relationship with my editor at National Geographic Books, Hilary Black. And when I was doing all of the discussions and rollout for When Women Ruled the World, we started talking about what the next book should be. And I had a couple of ideas, and I was interested in doing something on authoritarianism, doing something on how the ancient Egyptians excelled at presenting their rule as not just necessary, but the only moral possibility out there, the only option, the last best hope for all of us. And that's why I named it The Good Kings. And that's what I'm poking at the whole time, because what government that wants to take control from people, what they always do is they try to make it an equivalent of values, a discussion of how we will be your good fathers, we will do right by you. And that's exactly the kind of ideology that I'm trying to mess with. So it was a fun perspective. I didn't expect it to be so very interesting and joyful to write. And we work with these kings all the time. I mean, I didn't pick any kings that nobody knows about. These are all the big names.
And it was interesting to read through and see, stuff we had talked about in class, but just a kind of writing of the, very stereotypical narrative that we, you find in the history books that we teach the undergrads, and kind of, here's a new perspective on looking at all this material in a different way.
It meant that I didn't have to worry as much about the research. Like, if I'm going to write about the female king Tawasret, I really need to get in there and research, because it's not my area of expertise. I don't do the late Middle Kingdom. I don't know a lot about the 12th dynasty. And I'm looking at a time period that is far afield from where I feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But talking about pyramids, we always have to talk about pyramids. They make us talk about pyramids. It's just even though it's also thousands of years different from what I do, separated from what I do, but it's something that I have to think about when I teach. And the Ramessid period, no different. Akhenaten, no different. So Senwosret III, I guess, was a little bit harder. Again, I felt a little on the back foot with that chapter. But it was
but it's still like going against these, traditional narratives that we have of what did Senwosret do with the elites, and but
that was how you read it, where I would open it up with, here's the story that we're given, and then kind of mess with it.
Or a lot of things where, a lot of viewpoints you took were, instead of viewing this as, you know, a show of strength, it's actually a show of weakness.
Yeah.
And you can take the same evidence that some people argue and say, oh, Khufu's so great, he could build this giant pyramid, or Senwazir was so strong, he brought all the elites to the capital, and it's actually a show of weakness, that they were forced to do this, or they were, you know, grappling at straws to try to get some power.
Each one of those kings was chosen because they're so well known, because they're a part of our zeitgeist and our cultural memory and our discussions. Each one of them happens at the height, the apex of one of these swells of power, if everything is an up and down of this 3,000 year time span. And it was so interesting going through all 5 of them and seeing how each one that's at the tippy top is right there ready to have the roller coaster go down. And so, yes. And so each one of them was manufacturing a system that was ready to fail, each and every one. And that was something that I didn't expect. I don't know why I didn't expect to write my way into that. We think of the height of something not as the beginning of the end, but as the end of the beginning, right? And so to look at it from, especially in this apocalyptic zeitgeist that we're all living in, that's the only way that I could look at it. And it was particularly interesting to see the more Baroque, the more denialism, the more ideological, moral things got, the more everything was just about to collapse. So yeah.
Thinking about your writing process, how does it differ from writing, you know, an academic article or book? You're currently working on some right now.
Yes, I am.
Do you enjoy one more over the other?
They're so different. The way that I write these 2 things, either the trade book or the academic book. The academic book starts with the footnote, right? And you know, you're working on your dissertation right now. You're in the weeds and reading all of these other people's work. And then, I mean, how is your process working on your first academic book, i.e. the dissertation?
So typically I would usually do a bunch of research first and then write, but I'm trying a new strategy of kind of researching and writing in tandem. So it's more fresh.
Yeah.
Because I find when you're writing and then you have to go, you know, go grab this footnote, or, oh, I read this thing a couple days ago, let me go like re-find it. It breaks it up too much. So I'm trying to
academic
do it
books
together.
Are so derivative of the scholarship that has already been written.
And you spend like hours on citations.
Yes, that you forget. So much of academic writing is so stultifying because we forget that we have a point to make, because we're so busy citing and saying what somebody else has said, that our point becomes this tiny, defensive, weak, fearful sort of point. And so I'm not saying that my academic writing is necessarily like that, but everybody's academic writing is to some extent like that, because it's part of the nature of how it is expected to be done and needs to be done, and how you protect yourself as you're doing it.
I think there's a difference to early career scholars versus you have a little bit more.
I don't have to footnote as much as you do.
That, or just you feel maybe a little bit more freer to make big claims and
but anyway, in answer to your question, not that I don't use data in my trade books. I do, but my academic books are data first, and then I take that and I analyze it. I just posted that Spider-Man meme, which was really, that was really funny. What is it? He's like, tell me the truth. You can't just mess with the data. You have to analyze it.
She's like, no.
So that's where I do it differently when I'm writing the trade book, much to the chagrin of my future self when I actually have to do the footnotes. But I write from the idea first, and then I'm like, oh crap, I need to footnote this, and I'm relying on 20-some years of academic knowledge and a foundation. So I'm like, oh, I can say that, and then I'm like, oh, I should really footnote that. Who said that? What's the latest, most reasonable, most accessible thing that I could use as a citation for that point? And then I'm doing the footnotes after the fact, which I always tell you guys never to do. Yeah. So I start with the big idea first, and then I put in the weeds instead of the weeds and then the big idea for the academic.
Do you have like an outline? Because it's very, you have a very good flow, and there's, a good thought process as you're going through it. And when you bring stuff up, it fits, it doesn't, I
did not outline it.
So it's just kind of your
Well,
brain.
well, you were asking this question, but you know the answer because you were there when I outlined it. And
What's your notes file?
well, I have a notes file, but
Yeah.
there's also, I did this particular book in the context of a class that Jordan was one of my TAs for. And this class was an Egyptian religion class that I forced my book proposal into. And then on the fly during a pandemic over Zoom, my first Zoom class ever, I would tape 10 weeks of lectures. And I just was like, okay, I'm gonna.
So long ago,
doesn't it?
Oh my
Well,
God.
it was
I was
long
just
ago.
remembering, and I was like, that was
2020. It was March
It was
2020.
spring.
Spring started in
Us
March,
and
March to
Amy.
June. Yeah. And now it's a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
That's crazy. It's crazy. And so it was completely on the fly,
Yep.
but I also made it it came from lecture notes.
It worked.
So then I took that lecture, which was recorded, and I handed it to my trusty sidekick, Amber Myers Wells, Amber, who then transcribed it. And thank God she can understand the ancient Egyptian words and the vocabulary and the names. So she actually sat there and transcribed it, poor thing, and then gave it back to me. And she cleaned it up, put it, took out the ums and the uhs, and we don't need that kind of a transcription. And then I got this mass of pages, and I'm like, oh shit, okay, here we go. Now I have to write it into something that makes sense, that's interesting. And that was a mess. But it
going
was
from notes to prose, and
and so I just had each Word document was like, that transcription was at the bottom, and then I had to start with I had to start afresh with a new thing, and then I kind of pull things up and shove things down, and you come up, you go down, and you get rewritten, and you get discarded, and it was just kind of a really messy process. But I think that the way I did this time, that way of writing from a class and from a spoken word, enabled me to make it much more conversational, because the way we write to a page is different from the way we speak to an audience. And so that communication style was always there in that other writing, and it just helped me to be
it was very conversational, readable and accessible, I feel like, for everyone.
So it's a class, but in a fun way. Yeah.
Speaking of, so looking at, trade versus scholarly books, we know the debate within academia about, whether people should publish trade books or books for the, general public versus only academic. Obviously, we're on the side of publishing, books that are accessible to everyone, right? We don't need to be an Egyptologist to understand a lot of this data material. So why do you think it's important to communicate to the public in this way? We're obviously doing a podcast, you give lectures to the public. It's obviously a big part of your goals, your career goals. So, why push back against, certain people in academia who don't see the value in such things?
I mean, the way she's asking the question means that Jordan knows that I have received much pushback amongst my colleagues for writing said trade books. And
but it's like, it doesn't count on your tenure thing, right? Or it counts in a weird way.
It kind of does, but it doesn't count as much as, it's not an easy slam dunk.
Academic book, and it's like, there's debates on Twitter you see about people wanting blogs to count, because you put a lot of effort into writing, even like Twitter threads. They're well researched, cited. Blogs can be well researched, cited. Like, why can't those count in a similar as something? It's funny because if I put my energy, and I have a reasonable amount of energy, if I put all of that energy into academic writing, and only academic writing, with a whole lot of jargon, whole shit ton of jargon, and made it as complicated and difficult as possible, I think that I could have become seen as some sort of amazing professor of very complicated systems, and I could have done that, but I don't find it. I don't find it interesting. And also, it's because I'm anti-authoritarian in nature. I am an anti-authoritarian by nature, right? So if that's what I want to do, then these trade books are a way of speaking truth to power in my world by not agreeing to participate in that system in the way that's set up. And thank God I teach at UCLA, which appreciates and values, certainly at the very top, the trade books that I do produce. My peer scholars and colleagues do not always feel the same way, but the deans and the provosts, they think that kind of outreach is important and necessary. And What I think amongst,
Yeah.
younger scholars, it's changing
Yeah.
a lot, I think. So
Yeah, but those younger scholars that go deep into jargon and deep into theory. Not that there's anything wrong with theory, but it's the way you do it, right?
not making it accessible, yeah.
Right. Or who, I'm editing a
But I feel
volume,
like they
right?
feel pulled into that, like to be respected or to
Yes.
get some clout, they have
Yes.
to like dive deep into the academia side of things.
How
and then
much
if they
shame?
do anything else, you get shamed, yeah.
How much shame do you feel for not knowing certain languages, not being able to speak certain languages? How much intellectual shame do you feel? That's a daily part of our lives. And how often do you feel like, well, we're doing this volume I'm doing it with Danny and Nadia,
Yep.
An edited volume about Egyptian social history. And we have some articles in there where people have Latin quotes or they just quote in the German, and we're like,
I was quoting in French and you guys were like, translate
no,
it.
it's
And
got to
I was
be,
like, okay.
it's got to be accessible,
Yeah, I
right?
had French, yeah.
But my first book
But
has
that's what you're
all of
supposed
the
to
quotes
do.
in German
Yeah.
or French or whatever.
Don't translate, everyone knows it.
Right,
Well,
everyone
yeah.
should know it, right? But we're now entering a new time period in which accessibility is the game.
Yep.
It's the key. And so now we are not doing that anymore. And it's a really interesting difference. Everything is political. Everything in academia too, how we publish, how we write, whom we include, all of these things are incredibly political. So the trade books, you can't get more political. But I feel I have something to say. And I feel that what I learn about the ancient world is relevant to the modern world. And I'm sick to death of the anti-intellectualism and presentism that says that antiquity doesn't matter. This is how authoritarians manufacture identity streams that exclude people. They use antiquity. And if we don't talk about it, or we pretend the ancient Egyptians were so different from us, we would never have a pharaoh. Well, I'm going to mess with that and say, so you think you don't
Drink
have a
the
pharaoh?
Kool-Aid.
Okay, let's discuss that.
Yep.
And that's interesting to me.
It makes me think of your recent Facebook post about Rome and how that, like, just the comments on that.
Which one? What did I?
About, like, Rome not being used by, white supremacists.
Oh,
as
yes.
Being this kind of.
What was it? The manufacturing of a white Rome.
Yeah, white Rome.
Yeah.
And
for
it was
white
like,
power.
people were so upset.
Yeah, they were so upset. They're like, don't take my white Rome from me.
Yeah.
I need it to be white. And they're like, it was never, we know it's not white, but yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So,
Or how it's used.
Yes.
Getting into the book a little, you start off by talking about being a recovering Egyptologist.
Yeah.
Why do you use the term? Or how would you then label yourself if not an Egyptologist?
So the way that I wrote that, I tried to bury it deep in the texts. It just like have it be a little throwaway at the end of a sentence somewhere. And my editor read it and she's like, Kara, you buried the lead. This is the way it should start. And I'm like, don't make me make it the first sentence, because then it's kind of a throwdown against my field.
That's why I'm like, I have to ask a question about this now.
Yeah. Well, if we're going through sea changes for everything and we're discussing what it means to be an American and what kind of clothes we should wear, and even the weather is political, then we also need to discuss our fields.
But I think it's all the more relevant, right? We see humanities not getting funded as much as usual. Departments, Sheffield's archaeology department getting closed officially as of a couple of days ago, yesterday. So it's like, are there even going to be NELC departments in the future? So is it useful to even, label yourself an Egyptologist instead of, an ancient historian or a social historian looking at the ancient past? And
I mean, my social media has me as Egyptologist, and Amber and I tried to change it. You remember? I tried to change Kara Cooney Egyptologist on Facebook.
Well, that's when I was making my website. I was like, how do I label myself?
Yeah.
And I was like, ugh.
Well, if you do it on Facebook and you start a profile, it's so hard to change. We kind of gave up. If anyone knows how to do this, let us know.
Well, I think you're also so well known as Kara Cooney Egyptologist.
Now there's all these other Egyptologists out there.
Yep.
There's all these Professor X Egyptologists. I'm like, oh shit, I started a
trend.
And I was just trying to differentiate my private versus my public. But yeah, so the Egyptologist thing, it's there in my social media as Egyptologist, and then I start out this book by saying I'm a recovering Egyptologist. So there seems to be kind of an incongruence there, which is interesting. And essentially what I'm dealing with, and I think what our entire field is dealing with, and certainly what you as graduate students are dealing with, is what do we want to be when we grow up? What is our field about?
Yep.
What difference does it make to call it Egyptology versus social history that uses Egyptian sources as data,
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes a big difference. And I think that
Once after finishing the book, it's very clear why.
well, what did you get? Tell me.
Just that, by saying you're an Egyptologist, ignoring all the authoritarianism, the patriarchy, and you're bamboozled by the shiny gold and the pyramids, and you're in the position to say, oh, it doesn't matter that like maybe Khufu or Akhenaten or Ramses were awful authoritarian leaders. I just want to study like these texts and ignore all the implications of these things. And where today we don't have the luxury of doing that, because it's it's affecting people's lives, and so we shouldn't do it for the past either. We should recognize these things.
Being an Egyptologist is navel gazing.
Yeah.
It is narcissistic, and it is apologist, and it is apologizing for an authoritarian regime that was extraordinarily unequal in its makeup. And
it makes me think like the intermediate periods are actually the periods of like more equality, and more people had more stuff.
Maybe.
But then we don't want to study it because it's not as flashy, and you don't see.
Well, that at UCLA we're becoming we have created a niche in intermediate period studies, which is pretty interesting. And those time periods of collapse are government collapse, social collapse, however you want to define that, are really interesting. Not that there's no bloodshed and tears, but to say when things are centralized there's no bloodshed and tears is ridiculous too. For whom? What are we talking about? And so that's,
if you're just looking at the court, fair, but for the rest of the people.
But we get seduced by it. We want to look at the pretty pyramids, the pretty statues, the pretty temples, and those things are not made by and large during an intermediate period.
But it's just thinking about how statues are being discussed today, and then to go to Egypt and just be like, oh, look at this pretty statue, and ignore all the other contextual issues that also probably were happening back then. When we think of how statues are used today, there's a disconnect, and I think the movement is to make these things connect.
But you raised at the beginning of this a really interesting and problematic point, which is that in this time period of anti-intellectualism, when the humanities are getting cut to the bone, if not eliminated in certain universities and countries and places, Japan doesn't have any public humanities at public universities. It's just gone.
Really?
Google it. And so private universities, yes, but not at their public universities.
When it's like, think about our undergrads who take
class,
like we get most of our students by taking like a gen ed.
And they're all STEM students coming to take my
they
GE.
Think Egypt's awesome, super interesting, but they don't see the relevancy of it, or what can I do with this? What job can I get?
To actually major in it or study it as a thing. It's so true. So in the midst of that anti-humanities intellectualism, for me to say that I'm a recovering Egyptologist and then go against my own field smacks many of a disingenuousness, that I'm not protecting and supporting my field, which I get.
But do you want to?
I don't want to protect and support the field as it is. No, that's the point. And this is what we talk about at UCLA all the time, because UCLA doesn't really fit in the traditional Egyptology of the rest of the United States, if not the world. And we train in a different way that is, well, how do you see it as being different compared to, you came from Chicago with a master's?
Like just non-traditional, of like language heavy focus, teaching the typical narratives. I feel like we're taught to always question and be really critical, and have very cross-disciplinary, I think, in a lot of ways. I think archaeology theory, art history, cross-cultural. A lot of people, I feel like a lot of our students,
a lot of people are doing cross-cultural,
but not in like new,
maybe
interesting ways.
This is a difficult conversation because we don't want to take down any of our colleagues or programs, many of which are excellent, but we just know we don't fit. We don't.
We're not
and
Ivy.
That's okay. We're not Ivy.
It's not this like long tradition of Egyptology departments. A lot of them have a dig specifically for,
or an epigraphic survey or something like that. But anyway, the recovering
more classics, like I would. Not to bring in classics.
But that recovering Egyptologist comment, starting out the book with that, is a throwdown, and I'm going to get some flack for it. So yay, that'll be fun. But let's see what other colleagues have to say. I think it will.
I think so. Anger. I think you tease it, you have to read the whole book, and then reading the epilogue, the conclusion chapter, it comes full circle.
But in a nutshell, I'm not even talking about the colonial racism that is the core of Egyptology as a field. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about what it means to be an apologist for an authoritarian regime.
To study.
To celebrate it, to celebrate in its beauty and its productions and its creations, to celebrate Ma'at, the order of an Egyptian state, not as law and order that is imposed, but as something that helps create cultural cohesion in a positivist light. That I want to mess with, and had a great deal of fun doing. So yeah.
So speaking on that, so throughout the book and in the title, and also you're making a lot of analogies between modern day stuff and ancient Egypt. So why do you think we can use, or why did you, besides the fact that you're a trained Egyptologist, why use ancient Egypt to understand, authoritarianism, inequality today? Why use the past, I guess, in general to look at these modern day issues that we're going through?
Well, as you know, being in the classroom yourself, teaching ancient Egypt, it allows the student to look at something that is not their own world from a distance, with some distance and sterility, so they can look at it and examine it as something not a part of their own life. They can judge it. There's a separation. They can get in there. It's like you can see somebody else's problems in their family from afar at a party in a snapshot way better than you can deal with your own family's issues, right? Because that separation helps you. So Egypt affords us that. Egypt also affords us 3,000 years of ups and downs, which is super useful because we've got like 250 years of nothing, maybe 400 if we include the very beginnings of this American nation state. But it's a blip compared to what we can work with for ancient Egypt. And then finally, the reason I like to use Egypt is because I've been told, and many academics hold to the idea, that they cannot be political with their work, that these people are different from us, that we cannot impose our Westernisms and our modern politics on the ancient world. And if we do so, it is immoral, it is wrong, it lacks rigor, it's very problematic. I think that the more we separate ourselves from the ancient Egyptians, the more we engage in a silent racism that makes the ancient Egyptians other. I wanted to break this down in a way. Well, we have the same DNA, we have the same social systems. These things are not that different. We live in the same agricultural complex bureaucracy.
Same thing by a different name.
Yes. So, and when you read some of these ancient bureaucratic texts, you're like, oh my God, they're just like us. They're counting shit. They've got their bureaucrats. They've got their guy who doesn't want to take responsibility, whatever it is. But I wanted more humanity coming from the ancient Egyptian side and interacting with all different historical discourses. So, and most of my examples, being an expert of Northeast Africa, the Mediterranean world, are from that part of the world. And I pull in many American examples because that's the other place I know best. I'm not pulling in a lot of ancient Chinese examples. It's not something I know as well, though I'm sure somebody else could.
Current events,
But I take this one seriously, and I'll get criticized for it again. And I'm sure this book, somebody will call it universalist, as the woman who would be king was called by Christina Riggs in the Times Literary Supplement. And it's akin to calling somebody racist by saying that you're imposing your Western ideals, morals upon an ancient society that wouldn't have felt the same way. And I say, no, I think that we actually have to pull these things in.
But there are some things that are,
there is no way that you or I or anybody in this world can look at anything in history at all without imposing anything. So it's ridiculous to say that the reason we study history is not to impose at all. It's all an imposition. And to say that the stories that we tell that we think are not political is ridiculous. And that's exactly the discourse we are all having right now. That American history, world history is political in favor of the white patriarch.
A narrative.
Yes. Yeah. And now we're returning it to indigenous women, children, enslaved people, and so on and so forth. And that needs to happen more and more. So I'll continue to do it.
At least for me, beyond that, just having a modern analogy makes it more understandable. You go, oh, okay, like I get it, what you're saying about something maybe you know, the average public maybe doesn't know who Senwazir III is, but if you then compare him to something Barack Obama did or Bush or Trump, then they go, oh, okay, I understand this relationship between the leader and the elites.
Well, and let me take it one step further. I think it's actually rather racist to separate these ancient peoples and to say, oh, their system was magic and mystery and so different from anything that we would do, all religiously oriented and so foreign and strange, and we can't ever really truly understand it. To do that is to make them into almost non-people. And I can't engage in that discourse any longer. And this is the thing. This is why I'm a recovering Egyptologist in the first line, because I engaged in all of that. That's how I was trained. That's how training begins. And you're broken down and you learn to do things in a different way. But why was I attracted to ancient Egypt in the first place? Because I like the shiny, pretty things. I think Amenhotep III is gorgeous. I think pyramids are awesome. I am attracted to what the patriarchy can produce. If I can be attracted by it, then you can, then we all can. And then we all need to look into ourselves and think about how a pretty temple can get us to go, oh yeah, I have no human rights. And everyone's getting arrested.
Or to forget the fact that you don't have those.
Yeah, but I have a pretty temple, so I guess it's okay, and America, I get to participate in that.
Nationalism.
Yeah, so I guess it's okay then. But how much hold it has on us when Colin Kaepernick kneels for our political cult, which is no different from any ancient Roman imperial cult. And those things need to be equated more often, in my opinion, anthropologically.
Totally agree. So why do you think we're, inherently drawn to monarchies, authoritarian regimes? One, why do you in the introduction you go through all kind of the positive aspects, where in like a perfect world, with a morally just person, having a monarch would be the best political situation. One person in control, making perfect decisions for everyone. But it never actually plays out that way because we're not perfect people.
Do you know who was just here the other day? Jonathan Winterman was here, and he was saying why he couldn't watch Avengers movies, because it's all just watching your benevolent dictators decide who's committing a crime and what their punishment should be and how to deal with all of these things. And I was like, oh, when you put it that way, now I feel bad about watching Avengers movies, but it's the same kind of thing. I think when there's extraordinary amounts of change, which God knows there is right now, when we don't know what the future holds, and God knows everyone is trying to figure that out, whether religiously or secularly, it feels comfortable and good to have a fatherly figure watching out for you.
But is it because we were raised in the patriarchy that we want then the fatherly figure of our culture?
I don't know the answer to that.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I know exactly what you're saying.
Like if we were raised in a different setup, would we not look to having one single leader?
I mean, I guess you would, to answer that question, I would have to look to a hunter-gatherer society that still existed on this planet within the last 100 years and look at a time period of crisis and how people reacted, how what the reaction was like. I suppose one could look to Native American peoples being destroyed, culture being taken away, and how they reacted.
But I'm even thinking like Rome, like they had, their council of elders in charge, but then when push came to shove, they would elect a dictator for a short period of time, which then, eventually became...
Crisis is always the way to get those emergency powers, to get the father figure to come in and take care of you, right? Authoritarianism allows quick change. It allows you to pivot and turn fast. At least that's what we think. And in the short term, it actually does. I need this, let's go do it. And we create these short-term powers.
Our Congress and how long it takes stuff to get pushed through, because they have to get,
all the arguing and bickering,
3/4 of the people to all agree on something.
Well, and how often
But if you just had one person who could just make the decision.
If you follow human-induced climate change at all, and you look at how horrific it is to get the United States Congress to do anything about climate change, and then you look at, and I'm not saying China's great on this, but having an authoritarian regime, okay, look at a place like Singapore, right? Having an authoritarian regime saying we're going to do it this way and affecting change very quickly and imposing it from the top is something that is very seductive. And And I'm not saying that democracy is awesome either, because what we've made out of democracy is really just an oligarchic, patriarchal, unequal capitalist bullshit. So I don't think that I'm not here to say, oh, but we all want democracy, because I think when we created whatever this form of democracy is that we have created is not winning. It is not successful. And so I'm not saying that that's what we protect at all costs. I'm saying that we have been in a patriarchal condition for 10,000 years, which is not that long for human beings. We've been on this planet as Homo sapiens sapiens, arguably for 250,000 years.
Yeah.
And 10,000 years is nothing. So if we have had that agricultural revolution, we had an industrial revolution, maybe we had a sexual revolution, but I'm not sure. I guess we're here, so yes. And so will there be another revolution? There must be, I think. And it's what we're all talking about in every news article and every classroom discussion and every time we talk about Bezos or whoever going up into space. It's about the next human revolution and what we will become.
One of my questions for the next episode
is it really?
You have the end last chapter is like breaking up with the pharaoh, and I was like, how do we break up with the space billionaire?
I know, it's so true.
It's like, how do we do it?
Oh my goodness! I put on my Facebook not long ago. I said, I guess the patriarch, and I was a Jeff Bezos, whatever, or what's the other guy? Whoever going into space.
Virgin Atlantic
dude, Branson.
Richard Branson.
And I said, I guess the patriarchy has to jump the shark before we can smash it. And I have a pretty international Facebook following, and some dude from Turkey was like, I don't understand. This in translate makes no sense.
Jump the shark.
And so it
is Shark Week.
I did a Jump the Shark Wikipedia, and I attached it, and I said it's from a 1960s television show, or is it 70s? Because Happy Days was on a long time.
Oh, Happy Days.
It's from Happy Days when Fonzie jumped the shark in Hawaii. But anyway, so I'm like, this is why, and sorry, it's an American expression.
Yeah.
I guess Brits might understand it now. I don't know. But yeah.
That would probably translate weird.
But a lot of people tried to mansplain how useful space technology is for
really
for my well-being.
Burning those fossil fuels.
Exactly.
For 30 seconds of weightlessness.
Yeah.
Very useful.
So it's good. I'm glad that space technology is helping our homeless situation in Los Angeles.
People in Yemen starving.
Yeah, exactly.
Really useful for them.
All of
they're really happy.
Yeah. Thank you, space technology. Yeah. Yeah, it's really awful.
So turning back to why authoritarian regimes are good, or why we're drawn to them.
Okay.
Good.
I think that authoritarian regimes set up an ideology very cleverly, and Egypt excels at this, in allowing people to feel that they are participatory in some element
so
of
that's
this.
what I'm thinking. It has something to do with us at some point choosing to live in societies that are bigger than the amount of people we can know ourselves. And so we have to then have a form of representation, right? We're not living in like just 20-person communities where we're all related and I know all of you, I can trust you, we have a relationship.
No.
We're choosing to now live in big cities,
right,
where I can't know 99% of the people.
Right.
So then you need to all agree upon or elect someone who then is representative of
but there's a communal
you and is looking out for you.
Yeah, there's a communal ideology that everybody agrees is correct. That involves everything from the morality of your women folk, the differing morality of your men folk, the morality of your children, the way that a father should behave and take care of his family. And that morality largely goes unquestioned in these places. And then there's a morality of how you work with your higher ups, how you work within a hierarchy, how you are expected to be grateful when somebody gives you a job, or it's not like, oh, you're giving me some crumbs and you have all the money. There is a what's the word? Not paternalistic, patronage involved. So there are systems of patronage in which we're all supposed to behave certain ways. And the ancient Egyptians, they communicated mostly to other elites, king and elites, that top 5%, maybe even less. But why build big? Why build a huge pyramid? Why build a massive colossal statue or pair of statues? Why build obelisks if you're not also communicating to the masses? And you want the masses to be a part of this thing too. Why make a hieroglyph this big and this deep into a stone wall if you're just communicating with your elites? You don't need to do that. And that hieroglyphic system And the temples and the statues and the pyramids, those are hieroglyphs. They're all hieroglyphs. It is a way of making people feel they're connected to something, that they can almost read it. They're a part of it,
Yep.
but they're not. And it's
or that the king's doing it to keep things
okay, so
not
exactly.
order, and so you're not starving because the king's doing his job correctly, so you should be happy and let the king have a big giant tomb.
In the same way that I was mansplained that the space technology was going to help me and trickle down to me, and how much good it was doing. The pyramid's for you. The pyramid is for me, and the temple is for me, and the statues are for me, because what the king is doing, it may not be space tech, it is kind of space technology. He is talking to the gods. Yep. He is there intercessing with the gods, making sure that the Nile flows as it should, the sun rises and sets, everything happens as it should. He is going to say, only I can fix it, right? Only I can bring you all of these things. And it's cultish. And when you create that ideology, people are like, oh my God, we better get in line. We better make sure the king has what he needs. We're a part of this churning wheel of a system too. And if we opt out, it's all going to fail. And the Egyptians in the ancient world, I think, excelled better than any place at creating a cultural cohesion of getting most people, not all people, but most people, to uncynically participate,
buy into the system,
to be co-opted into this system, and to get what they could out of it.
And I feel like once it's in motion, it's easy to just keep going.
I mean, just let's take, I mentioned female morality. Take that one little thing. This is an interesting point. How hard is it to push back against the slut whore ideology of morality that is very recent? 10,000 years old at most, in most places much younger, right? This idea that a woman can only be with one man, that her sleeping around is hugely problematic for her own moral well-being, that her body is a temple, that purity matters, that none of these things apply to the male, right? Virginity, all of these things. And even today, in which marriage happens later, if a girl goes to a party and sleeps with 3 guys, I mean, no one will stop talking about that. That kind of sexual license is highly problematized in today's society, so that we can't, even though this idea of sexual female morality was invented with the agricultural revolution, with a woman whose womb needed to be bought and sold and marked, we still, even though we're moving away from that, we cannot get rid of it. It has such a hold over us, that ideology. And growing up, when you lose your virginity, who you're going to date, how careful you're going to protect yourself, all of these things. This is that ideology goes deep into your psyche, and you are trained. And how do you just discard that? And these are not easy
just
things.
Even like gender norms, like little kids are so good at being like, that's for boys or that's for girls. Like they pick up on it so quickly. And even if you're trying to be more like gender fluid and not say like, oh, blue is for boys, pink's for girls, the kids pick up like from TV, they pick up on it so quickly, and they'll fight you with it, and you're like, well, no, blue doesn't have to be for boys, and they're like, no, blue is for boys, and you're like, okay, like
Julian's decided he likes pink
so like quickly
because he wants to be anti-authoritarian, though he's one of the most boyish of the boys, but so
it's not
what was
get
your
older
question?
Why we're drawn to authoritarianism.
That's right.
Why we like it.
That's right. Well, gender norms fall into that too. Yeah, of course. We want to do as we're told. We want to stay safe. We want to stay safe.
One of my questions for the next part 2 episode was kind of all these things, and it's so much of this is based on fear. Right.
We don't want to opt out, because if you opt out and you're the lonely dissenter, then they're going to come for you. You're disappeared, or your family will be harmed.
Or the idea even just that, okay, maybe the status quo isn't great, but what if something worse, we try to mess with things and something worse happens? Or you give, the idea that there's only so much power, and if we make things more equal, that somehow you will then have less and it will be worse for you. So you build up all these ideologies to rationalize
with the limited
white men are better or something.
With the limited set of resources that are out there. How do you get to those limited resources the best? And if opting into white supremacy and telling yourself that's not what it is works for you, and it works for many Americans right now, then that's what you might decide to do. And in the same way, in ancient Egypt, if you opt into Ramses II's narcissistic ideology, if that's going to work for you as somebody who is going to gain with social mobility, even if you screw over a whole bunch of other people of your kind. So what,
What I think
people
this
will
is
do
another theme or a lesson to be learned is short-sightedness of all these things are so short-sighted in your generation of, how to one up you and okay, so we have generational wealth that will get passed down to your kids or what.
Yeah.
But it's not, long term. It always ends up failing in some way.
I loved playing in the book with short-term versus long-term repercussions.
Yeah.
And the short-term solution is create a war.
Yep. Or give more power to the leader.
Give more power, give more divinized power to the leader, which might actually pull more power to the elites, make the leader look bigger than he is. Or for Senwosret III, take down your elites, just destroy them, make them slavish to you like Louis the 14th. And the long-term repercussions of all of those short-term solutions were so interesting. So we love to live in short-term land. Human beings can't do long-term land very well, which is why even though we see the climate failing around us, we continue to do our same stupid short-term solutions, right? And when we're studying history, we'll study like so if everything's the wave, right? And I'm looking at the guys at the top of the wave, we're studying the short-term moments at the top of that wave, but you need the long-term examination to see how it's going to fall, how the wave is going to crest. And that's so interesting to me to see those but
then when you're living in it like we are today, it's you can't, it's in the future, it hasn't happened yet.
But that's why we do what we do.
Yeah.
Because we want to time travel. We want to know what our short-term solutions are going to afford us in the future. That is why we do what we do, I think.
Like we're all just like anxious.
Yes. We're all trying to
figure
figure out what's
go to the past where we have all the answers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go to the past so I know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And this one's too big. I do have my last chapter, which says what I think, what could happen in a more hopeful vein.
Yes.
But we could destroy it all too. Let's find out. It'll be fun.
So the book covers, we cover Khufu, Senwosret III, Akhenaten, Ramses II, and Taharqa. We'll talk more in depth on those kings and bigger themes, broader themes in part 2. But just to end this out, so when is it released? Where can we get it? Where can we pre-order?
You can.
Good Kings.
Okay. You can get it anywhere books are sold. You make that decision because even that is political. Yes. So
bookshop.org is great for buying books or your local bookshop.
And as for local bookshops, I have a deal with Book Soup, like soup that you eat, here in Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard. And I'm going to go in when the book comes out, probably before November 2nd, end of October. October comes before November. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I get a little dyslexic. And sign books en masse and then send them to you. So if you order from Book Soup, you can get a signed copy. And if you put in the comments, like a little inscription, what you want it to say, like, speak truth to power. I don't care. Something
for so-and-so.
Like for whatever. And I'll sign it with that stipulation in mind. And then we're going to keep talking about this, right? On all the social media here we'll on this podcast and my newsletter.
Are you gonna do audiobook?
I'm reading the audiobook. Yeah.
Good.
They haven't booked it yet, but I think I blocked out time. Have I, Amber, in August?
Amber says no.
No, I have. I think so, but I'm reading the audiobook.
I wasn't on that email.
You weren't? I always read the audiobook. So I'll be doing that. I can usually crank out the audiobook in 4 days, but I need 4 days to read. It's going to be a 400-page book as usual. Yeah. So yeah.
Good. So anywhere books are sold, pre-order it, look out for the audiobook, and stay tuned for part 2.
Yay.
We'll talk more in depth. Thank you guys.
Thank you to our listeners for your support and for subscribing wherever you listen. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a 5-star review and help raise our profile and let others know about it. Send your questions related to the show and topic suggestions for future episodes to karacooney@gmail.com. You can find the video version of the show on my YouTube page, and full show notes will be posted in the podcast section of my website, karacooney.squarespace.com. For that, thank you, Amber Myers-Wells. There you'll also find info on my books, upcoming lectures, and you can subscribe to my newsletter. You can find me on Facebook at Kara Cooney Egyptologist and on Twitter and Instagram at Kara Cooney. See you next time on Afterlives with Kara Cooney.